the next episode of Coffee with Carly, and I've got Jeff Shearer with me, who's Director of Marketing Operations at Fastly. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Carly. Happy to be here.
Now, I asked you to bring your favorite coffee mug, so if you'd like to share that with us and why you chose it.
Sure. So I have to admit, I typically drink out of like one of these like coffee thermoses because I just
Yeah.
like that it stays hot all day. I find I don't drink as much coffee that way. But I did bring this one out. This is one I always use on weekends. It's Patagonia. It's Patagonia Ironworks. My wife gave it to me as like a stocking stuffer. In fact, she was just saying to me, she was like, I didn't realize you were going to like that thing so much. It was kind of just like a throwaway gift, but I like it because it's insulated, so it keeps the coffee warm longer. But I also like it. I like Patagonia as a company, and actually the company that makes it is this local. They make like insulated mugs and like beer containers and things like that called Mirror in Seattle. I really like their stuff. They're a B Corp. They do a bunch of really interesting things around sustainability, and I don't know. It's just kind of a cool combination. So I'm always happy with that mug anytime I use it.
That's awesome. I love the combination of a company you can stand behind with a good product as
Yeah.
well. So, why don't you give everybody a little introduction about what your role is now, what you focus on from a responsibility perspective, and then a little bit about how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously in your introduction, you mentioned I run our marketing ops team at Fastly, and I kind of view marketing ops in kind of three pillars. One of those is around MarTech and marketing automation, and so when you think about using a tool like a Marketo or any of the various tools that hook into that, working very closely with sales operations and business systems teams around how data is flowing into Salesforce and other tools. That's a big part of what we do, and it's in fact where I kind of built my career. But there's actually two other areas that marketing ops owns as well. Another of those is around data analytics intelligence, right? And so thinking about the data that's flowing back from these tools and from various other sources in the business, and how are we able to make sense of that, tell the right stories with the data, derive the right insights. A lot of that is spent working in, Salesforce data, but also within our data warehouse, our business intelligence tools, and everything in between. So there's a lot of interlock between those tools, but they're very specialized skill sets. Typically someone who's really strong on the MarTech side may not be, a whiz with SQL and all of the BI parlance. And vice versa. Now, sometimes you encounter folks who actually can cross over between those, which is always awesome. But I find that having some specialized skill set in each of those is really helpful. And then the third pillar that we own, which is, I think is something we've always done, but it's kind of a more formal area that we own, is around process and project management. And so with that, it's kind of defining how projects ought to unfold across the marketing organization, whether they involve MOPS or not. We own the project management function, so if someone needs a formal project manager on their project, whether it's a big integrated campaign or it's some sort of internal initiative, we have those resources to farm out. But I think a big part of it is also how can we make that, because it's a small team, right? How can we make that a more scalable resource? How can we help folks self-serve and build good projects even if they don't have a formal project manager on them? So that's kind of why I call process and project management. So that's kind of what I own here at Fastly, and I'm within the growth marketing function of the organization. So I work very closely with our demand gen teams, account-based marketing, as well as other folks across the business. And I came to Fastly. I previously did about a year of independent consulting around MarTech and analytics, and then prior to that, I was in a similar director role at a company called Nintex in the Seattle area, which is where I'm based. And running marketing ops there. And then previously was in other MarTech and demand gen roles at Expedia and a couple other smaller startups. And it's funny because, I built my career kind of starting on kind of the paid search, performance marketing, local marketing actually side of things, more on an agency side. And I kind of gradually found my way into kind of these marketing generalist roles that oftentimes you see where they've got like the one person that knows email marketing, for instance, but they also do trade shows and they also do all these things. So I kind of found myself in that sort of a role. And the company I was in at the time, a company called Sesame Communications, had just bought a tool called Marketo. And they were like, we don't know how this works, but Can you figure it out? And I really took that on with a lot of enthusiasm and really found that it was like very much fit with the way my mind worked. And, it's almost like solving a puzzle each day, which I really found satisfying. And gradually over time got more involved in their community, started running the user groups, and I found that like the best way to learn a tool like that is to help teach others. That tends to be how I graduate, how I tend to learn new things. And it was just it was something that really helped build my career. I can't be more thankful for that community. I think it's amazing some of the folks I still run into from the Marketo community that I still have great connections with. And in fact, like have helped me find new jobs and new opportunities. Nowadays, I'm less involved day to day in a lot of the tools, but I really love mentoring and coaching the folks on my team to help grow in those spaces and recognize like the opportunity there. So I grew up very much on the MarTech side. I think I've been challenged over the last couple of years to dig more and more into the analytics and the insights side of things, which has been a really cool new area to learn. And I think there's just a lot more to do there. So couldn't be more excited.
Yeah. And having experience, especially with more people, having experience with multiple platforms, and the fact, like you said, that, each platform has different things to offer, pros and cons on all of them. Something that's become a bigger trend is the concept of migrating from one platform to another. And we get asked about this a lot. I always feel that it requires a further conversation to understand what is the impetus for change, to really determine if that's going to work out for them, if they're going to solve the problems that they're looking to solve. I know that you have some experience with platform migration, so how do you feel about it and kind of its rising trend? And then, any sort of, having gone through it, any lessons learned or advice that you would give to somebody who's considering a platform migration?
Yeah, I've gone through a couple of migrations, either from one marketing automation platform to another, or from the same tool and consolidating databases. At a past company, we were actually merging two Marketo databases, which is, arguably just as challenging because you have to kind of decide, are you moving to a net new database? Are you going to move everything to one that's pre-existing? And I think moving platforms as well is there's a lot that goes into that. And it's not something that a decision you should take lightly. There's a lot of MarTech that you could potentially reevaluate, maybe not every year, but you could look at more often if you feel like there's an opportunity to switch. I think of like data enrichment providers as a good example of that. That's a fairly easy switch if you were to find, this new vendor has actually got a little bit more useful data to us. The cost of switching is a little bit easier, but switching a marketing automation platform is almost like switching a CRM. It'd be moving from like Dynamics to Salesforce or vice versa. There's so many things that touch that tool, and there's so much data and work that has been built into the platform that either can't be migrated or needs to be migrated very manually. And so you really have to make decisions about it. So when I think about like having done this more recently, I think a big part of migration is to not think about striving for feature parity. I kind of touched on this earlier, but recognizing that you're moving platforms and there's going to be things you can't do in the new platform that you used to be able to do. And there's going to be all this new stuff that you can do that you couldn't do before. And you have to weigh all of that and say, hey, are we actually moving for the right reasons? Is this actually going to be a net positive for us over time? And I think when we moved from Eloqua to Marketo, it was all about how can we allow our rate of iteration and execution of campaigns to speed up? How can we better enable a broader team, knowing that Mops is always going to be a much smaller team than the rest of marketing. How can we better enable the rest of marketing? Those were very clear wins for us to move over to a tool like Marketo, especially with me having some of the background, knowing how to build that out. But I think recognizing, there's going to be some things we're going to be shedding. A great example being, Eloqua has a much more sophisticated way of syncing and customization to how it talks to Salesforce. Marketo is like turning it on or off effectively. And so it's a double-edged sword because there's going to be things you're going to miss out on when you move. Some of the fancier little things that you could hold back on or change the way certain fields are written to that you have to rethink when you move over to a Marketo. But it kind of leads into another point I just thought about, which is, you also need to recognize that there's going to be stuff you're going to leave behind, not just in terms of functionality, but in terms of data. Moving platforms is actually a really good chance to get a fresh start. And a lot of times I think companies get really hung up on this idea of, okay, we have to get everything moved over exactly the way it worked in the old system into the new system. One, that's not really possible because the functionality is different, but two, there's probably a lot of stuff you don't need to move over, and you need to kind of recognize where that cutoff point is. And it's actually probably a lot less content that you need to move over than you think. When you think about the programs that you're running, there's probably only the really active stuff that you really need to be thinking about moving over. Maybe you want to save the reporting data, but you may not need some of those old dead leads from way back when. You may not need, the program from 2016 and having all of those landing pages if only for reference, right? So recognizing that you can actually cut pretty deeply on some of that stuff as long as you do some of the homework first. It scares a lot of people, but I think that it ends up being the right approach, because one of the best feelings in the world is starting with a fresh instance and being able to just kind of say, hey, here's my fresh instance. What do we want to build in this? Which I think is really satisfying. So you very rarely get that opportunity. I've actually gotten the chance to, I think, start fresh with like 3 or 4 different Marketo instances, which I'm sure is probably pretty rare. But recognizing that and like seeing that as an opportunity rather than thinking it's this big burden to move everything over is really important. Probably doesn't apply to every business, but that's the piece I look forward to most, is being able to start with something fresh. So.
Yeah, there's nothing like a clean slate, right? Definitely is. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a matter of prioritizing what problems are we trying to solve by making this move, and properly evaluating to make sure that this move really is going to solve those problems and it's not actually stemming from something else within your organization, because it's not going to solve a people process kind of problem, right? The platform won't do that. And then, yeah, as you said, recognizing that this is an opportunity to rethink as opposed to just kind of continue to do the same in a different environment. So, yeah, I like that a lot. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us on Coffee with Carly. I've loved this conversation. I hope all of our viewers do too. And thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Carly.
Absolutely.